I've been on an incel forum and I've been pleasantly surprised. What I see a lot of the time more is this kind of raw vulnerableness and deep insecurity and pain. You can then paint this picture that the world is against men. And it really does feel that way. It really does seem that way. It really did to me. So Adolescence has sparked a global conversation, and I'm really grateful for that. You know, my mum asked me what red pill was the other day, and that would not have happened if it wasn't for that show. At the same time, it's also sparked a lot of anxiety. You know, parents might be thinking, is my boy in his room right now being radicalized by a violent misogynist? And that can cause a lot of panic. If we respond from panic, we might end up exacerbating the issue. So I want to just share some information, inform people about what's going on and what we need to be aware of to really give us perspective on what's happening right now. Firstly, incel violence. We need to understand this. It's very rare. So Adolescence has taken a very extreme example of what can happen to dramatize it, right? It's a TV show. We need to understand that. It's very rare. It's serious and rare. There's been one confirmed incel murder that's been linked to incel ideology in the UK. So the largest forum has 31,000 users. The most common thing I'm seeing in schools is language from the online world being sort of seeping into meme culture, being used as edgy banter. For example, femoid or foid is a term used to describe a woman in the incel world. And that is, present within some of the mainstream school settings. So that's something for us to keep an eye on, is that the language may be seeping through, and boys and girls, they might not agree with it, particularly boys, but it still might be seeping its way through. Second thing is that the show conflates incels with Andrew Tate. It's a really common thing to do. Lots of people do that, but they're very different. So imagine we have this 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the women go to 20% of the men, this really popular idea online. And it was talked about in the show. So we think of that as, it feels like an absolute truth to so many boys and men, then you've got to do your absolute best to get in the 20%. So that's the red pill stuff, right? I'm going to build my status. I'm going to build my muscle. It's a dog-eat-dog world. I'm going to get ahead. I'm going to generate wealth. I'm going to work on myself to attract a high-value woman. So that we can think of as kind of red pill content. Andrew Tate has a lot of videos in line with that. And then we've got black pill, which is the incel world. And this is, I'm completely hopeless. I feel ugly. There's no point in me even trying because I'm not going to be able to get into that 20%. And so it can take a very kind of despair-like, painful sort of turn into bleak blackness, right? Black pill. So that's really important for us to distinguish those two sorts of different types of vibes online. And obviously that, like I said, there's real variation. I just want to make this clear as well. As someone who's done a lot of research, gone into forums, watched a lot of content online, it's not all misogynistic. It really isn't. That stuff is there, and it's super important for us to obviously be aware of, and it's a big part of what is happening online. But the online world is so vast, so vast. There isn't a centralized place where lots of people are going. There's no www.manosphere.com. It's filled with different forums, different websites, influencers. Some people regard something as manosphere, other people don't. Jordan Peterson, for example, is regarded as a manosphere influencer. If you talk to Jordan Peterson, I've seen a video of him going, the manosphere types, as in the manosphere is over there, I'm not in it. So there isn't any kind of clear, definitive thing of what the manosphere is. But a lot of the content can fall into one of those sort of two camps. And one thing that ties it all together, the red pill and the black pill, is there is this idea online that the world is rigged against men, and that the progress for women and girls through feminism has directly impacted and held men back. And so that is something that I tend to use as a way of kind of stringing it together, that these spaces, although they might have different viewpoints or perspectives, they tend to fuel resentment and blame the other or a other, right? Pointing the finger outward. And that can happen in a number of ways. But that is, in essence, kind of what we're talking about when we talk about black pill and red pill. So they're two very different things. To conflate Andrew Tate, someone who's talking about status building and being a real man, all that sort of stuff, with an incel idea around despair and there's no point even trying, we need to distinguish the two. And thirdly, adolescence puts a lot of the onus online, right? It says the online is the issue. And although the online is a huge part of this and something we obviously need to be considering, what happens online is a reflection of what happens offline. And the manosphere is merely amplifying existing cultural ideas around masculinity at a time when there is a void of support for boys and men. And I'm going to unpack that a little more. So what I mean by that is that we're still socializing boys and men largely in our culture with that sense of rigid masculinity, right? Be dominant, be strong, don't show emotions, all of the stuff that, to some degree we're kind of aware of now as a culture. We're still in that process of examining that and looking at that, and that messaging is still out there. So we're at a time and place where masculinity is calling for a re-examination, a redefining, an upgrade, or an evolution towards something else. But because there isn't a facilitation of that process, then we end up with a void. And in that void, the old messaging of back to real men, back to this, it feels like a lifeline because it offers certainty in what can seem like an uncertain world, in what can seem like a hostile world. And that's the thing that happens as well, is that the influencers online, some of them, the ones that I watched, for example, they made it seem as if the world hated men. And that can seem like the truth because, well, there's anti-male rhetoric online. I've experienced it offline as well. And so when you take that anti-male rhetoric, you can then paint this picture that the world is against men. And it really does feel that way. It really does seem that way. It really did to me. And very quickly, I can start to develop an emotional attachment to the person that's delivering this message. And this is what happened to me. And this is what is happening with some of the boys. Now, a lot of the boys are watching the content passively. Some of them are growing an emotional attachment to the influencer. And when that happens, it becomes harder to critically think. And this is exactly what happened to me. But I want to make that clear as well, that if we just shut down the online world, the wider cultural issues still exist. So the manosphere isn't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. What we need is to offer boys emotional literacy, right, critical thinking, and support, spaces where they can feel seen and have permission to express. But there's an internal barrier there. We've feminized care. A lot of what I've just said there, I'll get a lot of boys telling me that's gay, or, you're a nerd, or whatever it is, whatever the insult is. We've feminized care. And so there's an internal barrier as well as an external. So we need to provide the space, but then providing the space isn't enough because there'll still be a block within so many boys and men towards actually stepping into that space. So that's just a little something on the wider cultural issues that are laying the fertile soil for the manosphere to exist. And we have to acknowledge that if we're going to move towards progress. And finally, I just want to say, we're in danger of having a moral panic here. A lot of the media headlines are using words like policed, anti-misogyny, tackling toxic masculinity. And I get it, I do, because it makes for a good headline. And that's the world we live in, unfortunately. However, we risk equating boys with misogyny. And there's so much more to this than that. As difficult as it is, because I have seen firsthand how difficult the behaviors can be at school. It's really difficult for a lot of teachers, for a lot of staff. And I've also seen what it's like when a boy steps forward, when I see and feel what is underneath the bravado and the facade. It's a human being. This is a young person growing up in a culture. This isn't about the individual per se. This is about the culture in which this person is growing up in, which they're a part of. And we're all a part of that culture. And this is the hardest part of the conversation because it generated so much discomfort and still does within me. But that is part of is what I think is important, which is not pointing the finger outward, but putting the finger inward and actually doing the work to take responsibility for the way in which I am reinforcing that rigid sense of masculinity. And what we do at schools is we don't say that masculinity is wrong or that it's toxic. It can become harmful. It can become toxic. But there are things about being a boy and a man that are wonderful and that we will want to keep as this evolves. Like, we're not here to get rid of everything. We can't do that. It feels impossible. But at the moment, this real man masculinity, quote unquote, it feels so much more tangible. It feels so much more prescriptive. And the boys that I speak to at school, they tell me that it seems like there's more reward at play if they follow that script. And also they're seeing the real man stuff more than anything else. What does it mean to be a healthy man? And I don't just mean be a man that's in touch with his emotions. I mean, be a man that has these traditional masculine traits, but can also show something that's less rigid, that's outside the confines of that, like vulnerability, like going easy on oneself, like having a rest day and not feeling like I need to prove myself the entire time. These are just a few off the top of my head, right? So when we have this conversation about what it means to be a healthy man, we're not getting rid of the stuff that makes us a boy, Like what I tell the boys at school is I say, I love jujitsu. That's a traditional masculine type activity. I love it. It's amazing. I also like wearing pink leggings and having a boogie. So, yeah, obviously this is a conversation that is a lot more, let's say there's more dimensions to it than that. But this is just give you a little something today as we understand and take a step back and really look at this, the identity crisis. That's the final point I want to make, which is at the heart of this, I think. Boys, as I was, are unsure of who to be. And when you see someone with conviction, speaking with absolute conviction and breaking things down in such a way that feels so digestible online, then that feels relieving. It feels amazing. And so we need to help the boys to navigate this. And the hard part about this work is generating more shame, affirming more shame. And that's what happens when we police. It's what happens when we see this as something to be rid of and nip in the bud, rather than something to actually be understood. So we can actually look at the unmet needs at play here, as opposed to the consequence of the unmet needs. We have to consider both.